بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. So now we are moving on to the Sabab al-Sharia. So in the previous lesson we said we have a hukam. Hukam is preceded by an illah or a sabab. Correct? What we're discussing now is that we have zakah. So what's the sabab for zakah? For Salah, for Hajj, Sadaqat Fitr, Ushr, Khiraj, etc. So the first one is quite long, Salah, then after it gets it's very simple after that. Al-Ahkam al-Shari'iyya tata'allaqu bi-Asbabha. The Ahkam of the Sharia are muta'alliq to the Asbab, meaning, for example, you have Salah. So Salah becomes compulsory when you have the Sabab of Salah. Same Zakah, Hajj, Ramadan, not Ramadan, Sawm. وَذَلِكَ لِأَنَّ الْوُجُوبَ غَيْبٌ عَنَّا. This is because the wujub is ghaib from us. We can't tell when it becomes wajib. It's ghaib. Ghaib means ghaib. فَلَا بُدَّ مِنْ عَلَامَةٍ. There must be some kind of alama يَعْرِفُ الْعَبْدُ بِهَا وُجُوبَ الْحُكْمِ, that he can tell that now this is compulsory upon me. Yes? So how would he know Salah become compulsory upon me? How would he know Ramadan is fast become compulsory upon me? Okay. وَبِهَذَا الْاعْتِبَارِ. Based on this, we would say we don't know the wujub directly, but we can understand that the wujub has come upon us via the sabab. So we would say we would link or connect or correlate these ahkam to the asbab. Now look at this chart here we have. So we say something that comes wajib upon you. Okay? Now there are two types of wujub. One is called nafsul wujub, one is called wujubul ada. Nafsul wujub means this action is now compulsory upon you. Yes? But after it becomes compulsory upon you, it is still not clear or still not mentioned whether it is compulsory immediately, you need to give tomorrow, the day after. Yes? And a simple example of that is, let's say for example, he gives example of, let's take the second example here. That's the second example. Where's the pen from here? The second example we have here is number 2. Is you have nafaqah. Nafaqah it is a husband's responsibility to provide the food, clothing, shelter and expenditure for the wife. Correct? What causes that? What makes it that this woman is entitled to this expenditure? We say here, in nikah. Nikah. When a nikah takes place, the nafaqah becomes compulsory. Yes? Acha. But how much nafaqah do you give when? Do you have to say, well, I'm getting married to you, probably live for like 50 years, so did I give 50 years of expenditure? Are you following? It doesn't work like that. Okay. So it says here, ثابت بالطلب. So the nafsul wujub says now, because of the nikah, the nafaqah is compulsory upon you. And each time there's a talab, there's a request for the nafaqah. I need a pair of clothes, or I need this, or whatever. Then it becomes compulsory. That's called wujubul ada. Do you understand? Another example he says here is al-bay'. When you have a transaction, what becomes compulsory? The stipulated price. Yes? But you must say, okay, give it later. Or it becomes compulsory upon the mushtari to pay that price. But the wujubul ada is when the person says, okay, pay me up now. Usually it's the same time, but it can be delayed. Similarly, we say Salah becomes compulsory when there's time. When time comes, Salah becomes compulsory. And the wujubul ada, when you have the khitab from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that perform the Salah. Okay? This is how he explains it in the book. Yes? Acha. Now what he's saying here, let's have a chart here. He's saying here, you have the khitab min al-amir. Yes? So the time itself, so what we're saying in the time itself, the time of Dhuhr, time of Asr, time of Maghrib, and time of Isha is the sabab. Correct? And when we have the khitab from the Amir, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when the khitab comes about, then it becomes wujubul ada, it's compulsory to necessitate it then. Let me give an example of this. Let's say a woman is in hayd. So nafsul wujub is upon her because of the time. But no wujub al-ada because The khitab is not towards her. She's not mahal of the khitab or performing of sallu. Do you understand? A person is majnoon. The nafsul wujub sabab is there, but the wujub ada is not there, so therefore there's no salah upon that person. So as soon as the time comes, the time is how we recognize that that's compulsory upon us, and the khitab is what you have the wujub al-ada. That's how he explains it. There's more detail in other books, but it's a simple way of explaining, and there's a bit, so you have a few questions that can be raised, but we just go through the text what he's saying here. So he's saying, فَسَبَبُ وُجُوبِ الصَّلَاةِ الْوَقْتِ. The reason or the sabab, you know what sabab is? The sabab of salah becoming compulsory is waqt. When you have waqt, salah becomes compulsory. So it's not our muftabi, it's not the fatwa that we give. But some people have said, some of the ulama, I don't know, maybe earlier when they hadn't reached as north as, because obviously earlier, maybe they're like, that if there's no time, there's no salah, because what's the sabab? The waqt. So if there's no isha time, for example in summer, in peak summer, so you don't get isha, the sun doesn't set, according to some philosophies, the sun doesn't set. It sets, but not so much that you can get the twilight, below the twilight, so this way there's no isha time. That's what we practice upon, but it's based on this principle. Are you following? So the sabab of wujubu salah, the salah becomes compulsory because of waqt. And now he's proving, he got two dalil. It's dalil number 1, and dalil number 2 is coming up later on. What's the dalil? Based on the evidence that khitab bi'ada'i salah la yatawajjahu qabla dukhul al-waqt. A command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to perform salah will not be directed towards the abd before salah time starts. So before salah time starts, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not give a command to fulfill this salah. Yes? When does the khitab come towards the abd? وَإِنَّمَا يَتَوَجَّهُ بَعْدَ دُخُولِ الْوَقْتِ. Only after the time it enters is when the khitab from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes to perform the salah. وَالْخِطَابُ مُثْبِتٌ لِوُجُوبِ الْأَدَاءِ. And the khitab is what makes the wujub al-ada compulsory. وَمُعَرِّفٌ لِلْعَبْدِ سَبَبَ الْوُجُوبِ قَبْلَهُ. And this khitab is what informs us that the sabab wujub was there from before. Yes, that's what he's saying. This up to here is very clear. Here again, there's a bit of a question. It's if you got a question and it's not very clear, I'm not 100% here on this as well. I tried a bit, but there's not much explanation. Or maybe it's very obvious to most of the shurrah, so they haven't explained it. To me, it's not that obvious. I have a bit of confusion here, but this is a translation, and what he's saying is the first until here is very clear. We just go with what he said here. Okay. And he gives an example, what I mentioned before. وَهَذَا كَقَوْلِنَا أَدِّي ثَمَنَ الْمَبِيعِ. أَدِّي ثَمَنَ الْمَبِيعِ. Give the thaman of the mabi'. Yes? وَأَدِّي نَفَقَةَ الْمَنْكُوحَةِ. وَيَجِبُ أَدَاؤُهُمَا عِنْدَ الطَّلَبِ. This is what? When we say أَدِّي ثَمَنَ الْمَبِيعِ وَأَدِّي نَفَقَةَ الْمَنْكُوحَةِ. What is this? Sababul. This is wujubul ada. Yes? You got it? Because أدِّي and أدِّي نَفَقَةَ, أدِّي ثَمَن, these are talab. طلب is وجوب الأداء. ولا موجود يعرفه العبد ها هنا إلا دخول الوقت. Is that what it says here? Huh? يعرف العبد يعرفه العبد يعرف العبد.
I think it's got the
Zamir. Yeah. It says يعرف العبد. There's nothing here, and he's saying here, that's right. And there's nothing to show the abd that is a khitab except دخول الوقت. Are you following? Okay. فَتَبَيَّنَ أَنَّ الْوُجُوبَ يَثْبُتُ بِدُخُولِ الْوَقْتِ. So from this we can tell clearly that the wujub becomes compulsory بِدُخُولِ الْوَقْتِ. Fahim? So when you have the time, the waqt is the sabab of salah becoming compulsory. وَلِأَنَّ الْوُجُوبَ ثَابِتٌ عَلَى مَا. And again, another example, dalil number 2. Or, is it dalil? You got another dalil as well? Yeah. Second dalil. Next dalil is that the wujub ثابت على من لا يتناوله الخطاب كالنائم والمغمى عليه ولا وجوب قبل الوقت. What if somebody can't understand the khitab? Obviously we can't hear the khitab, but let's say for example, person sleeping, person unconscious. Is this al-wajib upon him to do qadha later on? If you slept through the whole Fajr, you didn't wake up at all. You were unconscious during Zuhr the whole time. As long as it's not more than 5 for mughma alayh, what do we say? Is it qaza compulsory or not? Yes. That means that the khitab never came to him. So is it sinful? No, because there's no nafsul wujub upon him, because the khitab wasn't mutawajjih towards him. But is it qaza compulsory? What does that mean? That is, nafsul wujub becomes compulsory because of what? The waqt. Are you following? So in na'im has 2 things will come upon him. Waqt and the khitab. The waqt comes upon him, doesn't it? That means that is nafsul wujub is compulsory. Yes? Is the khitab mutawajjih towards a na'im and mughma alayh? They're not mukallaf. So therefore is it wujub al-ada upon them? They're not sinful. When they wake up, then the wujub al-ada comes upon them, now you have to qaza of this. This is a very clear dalil. So this is how we separate between the nafsul wujub and wujub al-ada. Because as long as you are in time and you're mukallaf, we will say you have to do ada or qaza. Ada is if the khitab comes towards you, means you're conscious. You have how your hawas are around. And if you're unconscious or you're sleeping, then wala wujuba qabla al-waqt. There's no wujub qabla al-waqt. That means that the only thing left is what? فَكَانَ ثَابِتًا بِدُخُولِ الوقت. The wujub is thabit by دخول الوقت. وبهذا ظهر أن الجزء الأول, the first minute, that's the juz' al-awwal, is a sabab of wujub. Understand? So what we're saying here, for salah you have 2 things, nafsul wujub and wujub al-ada. The nafsul wujub comes about because of time, and the wujub al-ada comes about because of the khitab. And a simple dalil is, a na'im has to do qaza of his salah, and he's not sinful. That means there was nafsul wujub on him because of waqt, and there was no wujub al-ada because the khitab was not mutawajjih towards him. This means that the waqt is a nafsul wujub and the khitab is sabab is wujub al-ada. You understand? Achha. Now he says here, he goes on to say, well, how do we how do we interact with the sabab of waqt? So he says here, there's 2 ways of dealing with this. One of them is naqlu sabab, as-sababiyya, min al-juz' al-awwal ila thani. What do we say? Look at it here, on your screen. We have waqtul isha. So as soon as time comes, what does waqt become? Nafsul wujub. So we say this juz' al-awwal becomes what? Nafsul wujub. And then what happens? As we go along, he didn't perform it. So the nafsul wujub, the sabab becomes, it moves from one place to the other, keeps on moving on. Are you following? So if you performed it here, that becomes a sabab. Performed it here, that's a sabab. You performed it here, that becomes a sabab. If you didn't perform it, then it keeps on moving down with you until you perform the salah. That time before the waqt, before you perform salah, becomes the what causes the wujub. Achha. Now based on this, you have musafir. That person is musafir. If he was to perform salah now, how many rakats will he perform? Why? Because right now it's wajib upon him, but he's a musafir. If he didn't perform it, and then he became muqim, how does he perform salah now? 4. Because why? Right now, the sabab is this time. And at this time he's a muqim. The same will work for it, ha'idha. And the opposite way around, muqim to musafir, musafir to muqim, ha'idha, non-ha'idha, etc. Will work. So he's saying, ثُمَّ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ طَرِيقان أَحَدُهُمَا نَقْلُ السَّبَبِيَّةِ من الجزء الأول إلى الثاني, is to move on the sababiyya from the first juz to the thani. If he doesn't, meaning you move it on, if he doesn't perform it in the juz al-awwal. ثم إلى الثالث والرابع إلى أن ينتهي إلى آخر الوقت, until it comes to a completion at the end of the time. فيتقرر الوجوب حينئذ. Then at the last time, we say the whole time becomes the last piece becomes the wujub. ويعتبر حال العبد في ذلك الجزء ويعتبر صفة ذلك الجزء. Now that table that we had, that little chart that we had, we have to consider both the condition of the abd. Is he musafir? Is he muqim? Is he sleeping? Is he awake? Is he conscious? Is he unconscious? Is she tahira? Is she in nifas? Is she in hayd? Similarly, we have to consider the waqt itself. Is that waqt makruh, not makruh? So all of those things must consider, the hal of the abd and hal of the waqt. وَبَيَانُ اعْتِبَارِ حَالِ الْعَبْدِ فِيهِ. Okay, here's an example. How do we consider the hal of the abd? He says, لَوْ كَانَ صَبِيًّا فِي أَوَّلِ الْوَقْتِ. If he was not baligh at the beginning of the time, and then at the end of the time, he becomes baligh. What happens now? what would happen? Is Salah compulsory upon him or not compulsory upon him? You have to qadha, you have to pray for him. كان كافر في أول الوقت. He was not a believer, he converted. Now after his conversion in that time, that Salah becomes compulsory upon him. أو كانت حائضا أو نفساء. She was in hayd and nifas أول الوقت. طاهرة في ذلك الجزء. Now she has to qadha that Salah. وجبت الصلاة. In all of these cases, you look at the last juz, because the sababiyya becomes muntakil into the last part, and now what happens now? Qadha becomes compulsory. وعلى هذا جميع صور الحدوث الأهلية في آخر الوقت. And based on this principle, all of those different situations where ahliya comes about, you're not ahl, you become ahl. From sabi to baligh, kafir to Muslim, haid to nufasa, etc. in the last time. While al-aqs opposite. بأن يحدث حيض أو نفاس أو جنون مستوعب أو إغماء ممتد في ذلك الجزء. You're ahl, then you become non-ahl. سقطت عنه الصلاة. There's no salah. Yes. أچھا. ولو كان مسافر في أول الوقت مقيما في آخره يصلي أربعا. ولو كان مقيما في أول الوقت مسافر في آخر يصلي ركعتين. Obvious. Now, how do you do i'tibar of the juz? وَبَيَانُ اعتبار صفة ذلك الجزء. To do i'tibar of that juz, what do you have to consider? We say here, look at this. We have time of Fajr, we have tulu'u shams. Okay? Now, in Fajr, what do we have here? The entire time of Fajr is what? Is kamil time, meaning obviously you shouldn't delay the Salah necessarily to very late. You should leave enough time that if the Salah was not counted, you made a mistake in the Fajr, you can repeat it again quickly. But in theory, there's no makruh time. It's like ethically disliked or to delay it very, very, very late. But in the whole time, there's no one makruh time in this. When makruh time start? When the sun rises. So when Fajr time elapses, then you have a karaha. What's a karaha? Tulu'u shams. So the entire waqt al-Fajr is like a proper time. There's no nuqsan in this. It's a proper full time. Yes. So now let's say, for example, you start Fajr Salah here, and you perform it here. You started it in the sabab was a kamil time, proper time, and you performed it in a proper time. Yes? If you start the Salah here, and then you continue it here, you finish it off there. What's happened now? You've started the Salah, the sabab of wujub is what? A kamil time. This juz, isn't it? This juz is a sabab. The juz before the Salah starts. That juz was kamil. Yet you perform the Salah how? Naqis. What's going to happen here? Isn't come. Salah will break because now you not perform the Salah as became compulsory. This is the opinion of one masla mentioned in the books of fiqh. Okay? In Asr time, it's a bit different. Because if you started performing Salah here, yes? And then you completed it here, what happens then? It became compulsory how? With nuqsan. So therefore, if the sun sets when performing Asr, you've completed with nuqsan. It was already complete with nuqsan. Obviously, the smarty pants question is going to be, what's the smarty pants question going to be? If you start Salah here, and finished it here, what happens then? You don't say it breaks. We say it doesn't break because in theory you're allowed to perform it it's makruh, but because it's still a time, there is a bit of wusa in there. Are you following? So if you performed it, you started in a not makruh time, before ihmararu shams, before it becomes very yellow and pale, before sunset. So because you're allowed to perform from here to here anytime, that amount of, we can say it's a lighter karaha. So this lighter karaha is acceptable to end the Salah. Not to start the Salah, to end the Salah. So if you end the Salah in ihmar al-rushd, not a problem. And this karaha is, and even if you were to start it, yes, and if you start from here and go over here, you say no, not going to count. So based on this, we say here, in Fajr, if the sun rises, Salah breaks. In Asr, it doesn't break. Why? Because in Fajr, it became wajib because of kamil. And in Asr, it became wajib how? In ihmar al-shams. فهمت؟ وبيان اعتبار صفة ذلك الجزء, أن ذلك الجزء إن كان كاملا. If that juz was kamil, تقررت الوظيفة كاملة. That now this wazifa, this salah has to be performed complete. فلا يخرج عن الأهدة. He will not be absolved of his responsibility by fulfilling it in a makruh time. Yes? ومثاله فيما يقال. One example that people have narrated in the books of fiqh. إن آخر الوقت في الفجر كامل وإنما يصير الوقت فاسدا بطلوع الشمس. Yes, when the sun rises and that time becomes fasid. وذلك بعد خروج الوقت. This is after the time has elapsed. فيتقرر الواجب بوصف الكمال. So now the wajib becomes compulsory how? With kamal. Are you following? فإذا طلعت الشمس, if the sun rises في أثناء الصلاة, during salah, بطل الفرض. فهم? Yes? Are you following? لأنه لا يمكنه إتمام الصلاة, because it is not possible to complete the salah إلا بوصف النقصان, except with some kind of shortcoming. باعتبار الوقت, because the time has some نقصان in it. أجل. ولو كان ذلك الجزء ناقصا, if that juz itself is ناقص, like in Asr, فإن آخر الوقت وقت احمرار الشمس والوقت عنده فاسد. The time at the ihmirar shams is also fasid. So it became compulsory how? With nuqsan. فَتَقَرَّرَتِ الْوَظِيفَةُ. The wazifa, the salah, became compulsory with some kind of shortcoming. End of salah is what? End of asr is what? Shortcoming in that time. Yes? When it's shortcoming in that time, then what happens now? Is the nuqsan in there, so it becomes compulsory with nuqsan. وَلِهَذَا وَجَبَ الْقَوْلُ بِالْجَوَازِ إِنْدَهُ مَعَ فَسَادِ الْوَقْتِ. So because of this, it is necessary to say that it's permissible at the time of ghurub shams, even though the time is fasid. Yes, because it became compulsory with a bit of nuqsan. So therefore, if you complete it in the naqis time, it shouldn't be a problem. Yes, and the next thing he's mentioning here is, next point he mentions is, he says here, وَالطَّرِيقُ الثَّانِي. The next way of looking at it, of analyzing it, is that we say, similar to the first one, that every juz is a time for salah, but not ala tariq al-intiqal. We don't say that, that we had a chart, it moved down. We don't say it moved on. Because what he's saying here, فَإِنَّ الْقَوْلَ بِهِ. If you say tariq al-intiqal, that this was a juz, then this became the sabab, this became sabab, this became sabab, this became sabab. All of those became sabab. Yes? And what happens then? You say one became sabab, then you break the first one. You're doing now what? بِإِبْطَالِ السَّبَبِيَّةِ الثَّابِتَةِ بِالشَّرْعِ. The Sharia made the juz al-awwal, the sabab. Then you say, if you don't perform it, then the sababiyya goes on to the next one. The first one is not a sabab anymore. So you say, well, that's not sabab anymore. So what Sharia has made the first juz a sabab, and the second juz, and the third juz. Now you're doing ibtal of the sabab which is the Sharia has established, which is not liked. Yes? You follow me? They say, okay, well now you have multiple wajibs then. If the reason you do intiqal is that they say this is sabab, and if you don't perform it, it goes on this way. So now it's not sabab anymore, it's sabab. So you only have one sabab. Are you following? But these people are saying, oh, well, every juz is a sabab. Then you have to have like 25 namaz, 25 salah in Zuhr time, because 25 times, like minutes or whatever. So what about tada'uf al-wajib then? If you say the first juz is a wajib, sabab, second juz is a sabab, third is a sabab, so then in Zuhr time alone you have 5 sabab, for example, for argument's sake. So don't you have to perform Zuhr multiple times? So no. We say here, فَإِنَّ الْجُزْءَ الثَّانِي إِنَّمَا أَثْبَتَ أَيْنَمَا أَثْبَتَهُ الْجُزْءُ الْأَوَّلِ. What the juz' al-awwal established, the second juz established the same thing. Nothing more. So you have one hukam, but multiple sabab for it. Can you have multiple asbab for one hukam? Yes, you can. فَكَانَ هَذَا مِنْ بَابِ تَرَادِفِ الْإِلَلِ وَكَثْرَةِ الشُّهُودِ فِي بَابِ الْخُصُومَاتِ. You can have multiple illa for one thing. And the easy example is, if you have one crime, one person committed theft. Yes? How many witnesses do you need in Sharia? If you have 100 people that give witnesses, you say there's 50 crimes. It's one crime, multiple shuhud. It doesn't change the hukam, one hukam. You have multiple sabab for it. Similarly, we say here, there's one zuhr salah, and each juz is a sabab, not ala sabil al-intiqal. And you want to say multiple asbab, the multiple hukam, you say, is doing ithbat of the ayn ma awjab al-awwal. But not really a big difference. It matter of this is probably a bit better in terms of, but it's the hukam and the rulings became the same in terms of what we mentioned before. And then tomorrow shall we go through to the Sabab al-Sawm inshallah. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi subhanakallahumma. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem. So yesterday, alhamdulillah, we discussed the ruling regarding Sabab Salah and how we see the Sababiyya is the Juz al-Awwal. Just see if the top one is on. The Sabab is the Juz al-Awwal, and there's two ways. One is Intiqal and one is Ta'addur Sabab. Now we're moving on to Sabab al-Sawm. What is the Sabab al-Sawm? وَسَبَبُ وُجُوبِ الصَّوْمِ شُهُودُ الشَّهْرِ. What makes Sawm compulsory? فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ. He tabarrakan, he used the same words of the Quran. شُهُودُ الشَّهْرِ. Why? He gives two reasons. The first reason he says here, لِتَوَجُّهِ الْخِطَابِ عِنْدَ شُهُودِ الشَّهْرِ وَإِضَافَةِ الصَّوْمِ إِلَيْهِ. Two things. One is, the khitab only comes about when man shahida minkum ash-shahra. The Quran says, man shahida minkum ash-shahra falyasum. The falyasum who only applies when shahida minkum ash-shahra. And number two is, everything shahr Ramadan, shahr Ramadan, shahr Ramadan. So shahr Ramadan, the idafa, he mentions that idafa, when the idafa to sawmi ilay is idafa to shay ila sababihi. There's ishkal and jawab in the hasha, but this is what he's saying here. Or in the hasha and the shara. So when you do idafa, sawmu Ramadan, then that means that the Ramadan is a sabab of the sawm. Right? So those are two reasons that we will say that the sabab of the fasting is the shahr. Then sababu zakah was sababu wujubi zakah milkun nisab an-nami haqiqatan aw hukman. It's already come in quduri. That the reason zakat becomes compulsory is because we have milk. You have ownership. What do you own? La ilaha illallah. Yes. We have a nisab. Okay? What's the sif of nisab is nami. What's the tamiz of nami? Haqiqatan aw hukman. So you have to have a nisab, meaning a certain amount of wealth. But that wealth has to be growing. So you own the clothes that you have, the stove that you have, the house that you have. Those things, they don't grow. They don't increase. For him, because you just bought it, it's going to use it. That's it. And then actually it'll depreciate. So if it grows haqiqatan, what grows haqiqatan? Livestock. They reproduce it, increase. Or hukman, the value increases. So it doesn't actually become more, but the value increases. How does it increase? You got gold and silver. Sharia says it increase. Why? Because the value of the gold and silver increase. Or you have tijara, you have a business. So when you buy goods, the purpose of buying the goods is for them to increase. So resell. When you resell, you get more money. So even though you bought like 500, the 500 becomes 600. But the money you spent to buy the 500 pound, £1 each, instead of £1.50 each, now you had 750. So because that nisab is nami hukman. So those two things are the sabab of zakat becoming compulsory. Based on this, he gives another masla. He says here, وَبِاعْتِبَارِ وُجُوبِ السَّبَبِ. Looking at what the sabab is. What's the sabab? Just the milkun nisab an-nami. Jaza ta'jil fi babil ada. Can you give zakat early? Because now in zakat, it's not mentioned here. In zakat, you have two things. One is nafsul wujub. I'm not sure if this is right. But what he's saying here is that the zakat becomes compulsory because of what? The milk. So when hawlan al-hawl happens, the whole year elapses, then you have to give it. But if you give it before the hawlan al-hawl, is the sabab found? You have milkun nisab an-nami. It's found. So because you found the, you have the sabab. If you give it, so if you perform zuhr before time, is it counted? No, because sabab is not found. You cannot perform the sabab for the sabab. But in nisab, you might think, okay, before the year elapses, can you give it? We say, well, depends on what you consider to be the sabab. We consider the sabab to be the nisab an-nami. So because we consider nisab an-nami, that's why we say here, ta'jil is permissible in this. Do you understand? In Hajj, what's the sabab of Hajj? وَسَبَبُ وُجُوبِ الْحَجِّ الْبَيْتِ. The house. Why? Hijjul bayt. That's in the Quran, Hijjul bayt. And we mentioned before that the idafa to shay ila idafa, it comes for sabab as well. Number one. And number two is, we see that it's only compulsory once in your lifetime. So it can't be the year, it can't be the nisab, it can't be the money, it can't be istita'a, it has to be, so it's only once. What is that? The bayt. For him. If it was money, then what happened? It can compulsory a few times. وعلى هذا, now based on this now, لو حج قبل وجود الاستطاعة. If you do Hajj before you had istita'a, somebody gave you a gift, somebody took you there on your own behalf, somebody paid for your journey, ينوب ذلك عن حجة الإسلام. that will suffice from the Hajj of Islam. Because why? What's the sabab? The Baytullah. So whenever you do, as long as you're baligh, then it will count. لِوُجُودِ السَّبَب. The sabab is being found. So because the sabab is being found, which is Baytullah, if you do it before you have istita'a alayhi sabila, it's still counting. وَبِهِ فَارَقَ أَدَاءَ الزَّكَاةِ. If you give zakah, let's say for example, you have, the nisab is £300, okay? You have 250. Okay? And you say, well, I don't have the nisab yet. But what I'll do, I just give, in 300, how much will I have to give? £7.50. We give us 50 right now, so I don't know why what later on. When I get £300, because it's selling off anyway the goods. Something happens, they say here, this doesn't count. Because even zakat before the sabab. Are you following? Yes? So because of this, by this, because the sabab is found in Hajj before istita'ah. But in zakat, the sabab is only found when you have the milkun nami. So therefore, you can perform Hajj before you become sahibul, before you have istita'ah. But in zakat, you cannot give the zakat before you have istita'ah. Or before you have the milkun nisab. Understood? Sadaqatul fitr, this came before somewhere as well. We say here, وَالسَّبَبُ وُجُوبِ صَدَقَةِ الْفِطْرِ رَأْسٌ يَمُونُهُ وَيَلِي عَلَيْهِ. The sadaqatul fitr is that person. So رَأْسٌ meaning head, meaning that person whom you are responsible to sustain and maintain, and who you are guardian for. So your children, etc. وَبِاعْتِبَارِ السَّبَبِ يَجُوزُ تَعْجِيلَ again. Why is ta'jil permissible? According to Shafi rahmatullah, came before, his sabab is the day of fitr. According to the sabab is what? The رَأْسٌ يَمُونُهُ يَلِي عَلَيْهِ. And that sabab is there before. If you give in advance, it becomes compulsory. حَتَّى جَازَ أَدَاؤُهَا قَبْلَ يَوْمِ الْفِطْرِ. You can even give ada of this before the day of fitr. Ushr kharaj, you have these are the taxes and the money you have to give on taxes. This is the zakat and the charity you have to give on land. So he's saying here for وجوب العشر سبب وجوب العشر الأراضي النامية بحقيقة الريع. That when you have an ushr zameen, we have to give 1/10. Yes, 10%. What's the sabab? الأراضي النامية بحقيقة الريع is land that grows. How did it grow? By actually having produce. When you have the produce, then the ushr becomes compulsory. Yes, and kharaj and ushr is a bit technical, and we do that. You're done that in Kudur, they do it more in Hidayah, inshallah. But sababu wujub al-khiraj, and that's for ushr, and for khiraj, al-aradi as-salihah li-zira'a fakanat namiyatan hukman. Is that land which can grow, can be harvested, will not necessarily be actually what? Will not necessarily actually produce crops, but it's namiyatan hukman. So in aradi and in ushr it's compulsory. When you have ushr, then actually having produce when you have to give ushr, 10%. And in khiraj, you have to give it whether you have produce or not, because of the capacity to grow crops. And this masala is a bit complex and detailed, especially in modern days. Wujub al-wudu. When does wujub become a wudu? When does wudu become wajib? Wudu becomes wajib when some say is ikhlaf in here. One opinion is sababu wujub al-wudu as-salah inda al-ba'd. According to some, it's salah. So if salah is compulsory, you have to do what? To perform wudu. وَلِهَذَا وَجَبَ الْوُضُوءُ عَلَى مَنْ وَجَبَ عَلَيْهِ الصَّلَاةِ. Whoever has to perform salah has to perform wudu. وَلَا وَضُوءَ عَلَى مَنْ لَا صَلَاةَ عَلَيْهِ. وَقَالَ الْبَعْض, others say no. سَبَبُ وُجُوبِهِ الْحَدَث. The actual reason for wudu becoming compulsory is hadath, impurity. Yes? So when you're impure, you have to do wudu. But the shart of it becoming compulsory is basically wujubu salah. So in here, in the afara, he hasn't given a fara in here, which will make it because that's why it says call al-ba'd. Like it does not make any difference really. But is it how you is it extending of salah? What's sabab? Is it intiqal or is it many ajza become the sabab? So that's how you do tafriq of it. But there's no, I can't say any major ikhlaf. Because here you have hadath, yes, and here you have salah, yes. So one will say this is sabab, and the other jama'ah says this is sabab.
But both you have to do it before.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. It's just a matter of takhrij of how they want to like lay out the ruling. There's no fara' mentioned. There may be fara' mentioned in other books, and it may be one of Jami Saghir or something, one of those books. But he says وَقَدْ رُوِيَ أَنْ مُحَمَّدْ ذَلِكَ نَصًّا. The second masala is mentioned explicitly by Imam Muhammad. That's why he says I can't stop. Understood? وجوب الغسل. وسبب وجوب الغسل الحيض والنفاس والجنابة. Simple. So that's the end of the أسباب الشرعية. سبحان الله وبحمده سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك ونشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.